Welcome to Praise, Prayer and Preaching with the Rev Dr Rick Dacey, Senior Minister, Wesley Congregational Life.
Many of you may be familiar with the famous marshmallow test. It's based on a series of child psychology studies at Stanford University in the 1960s and 70s. The basic premise is this. You get a little kid like this guy, this 4-year-old. He sits at a table in a room, and an adult places a single marshmallow in front of him, and he explains, you can have this marshmallow right now, or you can wait while I leave the room. And when I come back, if the marshmallow is still there, I'll give you another marshmallow. So you'll have two. And this is so amusing to watch what happens. As the tester leaves the room and the child is left alone with the marshmallow, trying to hold out. It's amusing to watch because we all know struggle with temptation. We know this kid's struggle. We recognize what he's going through. What we see in his face, what we see in his actions are the things that are so vividly expressed in him are the things that we as adults, the turmoil that goes on inside us as adults. We can identify with his struggle. Right now, though, I imagine there's someone in here who wants to know about this poor kid. Does he make it? Oh, he's smelling it. Does he make it through? Is he able to resist the temptation? Is he able to hold on? Is he able to be strong? I just love that pose. Is he able to wait and get that second marshmallow? Or does he eat the marshmallow in front of him? Do you want to know? I'll tell you in a bit. I'll tell you in a bit. So wrestling with temptation is part of life, and it's a very real part of the Christian life. But here's the thing. Some people assume that it's the main thing, that it's the main part of the Christian life, that wrestling with temptation is really the point of the Christian faith. That being a Christian is basically a life-size, scaled-up version of the marshmallow test. If I can resist temptation now, then I will get a big reward later. And you know, a lot of Christians have fallen into that trap. A lot of Christians have fallen into that trap, generally without even recognizing it. They've slid into a marshmallow mentality of religion. Now, if I can just resist temptation now, God will give me a greater reward down the track. But if we think of facing temptation as a way to get a reward later, a reward for our willpower, a reward for our strength, an extra marshmallow for our trouble, then we're not facing temptation the way Jesus faced temptation. And before he does anything else in ministry, Jesus faces real temptation in the wilderness. He's fasted for 40 days. But this is no marshmallow test. This is not a test of Jesus' willpower. Jesus is being prepared for what lies ahead. Look, spoiler alert. Jesus overcomes the temptation. He does overcome the temptation in the wilderness. but he doesn't get an extra marshmallow for it. Now, what happens when he emerges from his wilderness temptation? What happens? He sets out on his mission. He sets out on his mission, and he gathers disciples who frustrate him and exasperate him and let him down with their thick-headed misunderstandings and their fear-driven behaviors. He gets ridiculed and rejected in his own hometown. He spends 3 years homeless, on the road, walking from place to place with sore and dusty feet, serving, teaching, healing, feeding, with barely any belongings to call his own and no place to lay his head. Along the way, he faces unsavory characters. He faces dangerous situations and harsh weather. He faces opponents who are constantly looking to trap him or trip him up until he is ultimately betrayed, arrested, denied, mocked, humiliated, tortured, and led outside the city to be executed on a hill with criminals. That's what Jesus gets after he overcomes temptation in the wilderness. He doesn't get a marshmallow. He gets a cross. Now, someone might object. Hold on. After all that, he does get his marshmallow, so to speak. He does get his reward in the resurrection. But that's to lose sight of the fact that Jesus had all the marshmallows to start with. There can be no extra marshmallow for Jesus, no extra reward. Jesus had all the marshmallows, all the rewards, and he gave them all up. He gave them all up. He gave up infinite rewards out of love for you, for me. He didn't see his equality with God as something to use to his own advantage. He emptied himself. He made himself nothing, in Paul's words to the Philippians. And in Wesley's great hymn, he left his Father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace. Emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's helpless race. A marshmallow mentality of religion says, if I resist things for myself now, I will get more for myself later. Jesus does not have a marshmallow mentality. Jesus didn't go through the trials and temptations for his own gain. Everything that Jesus went through, he went through for our gain, out of love. So what does that mean for those of us who have decided to follow Jesus? What does that mean for you and me? Well, tonight is the first Sunday in the season of Lent. It's a 40-day period plus Sundays between Ash Wednesday and leading up to Easter. It's a season of spiritual preparation, recalling the 40 days of Jesus' preparation in the wilderness. You know, a lot of people choose to give up something for Lent. Jesus went without food for 40 days. So fasting from food or even setting aside something else like TV or social media or coffee or chocolate, all of those things can be a meaningful part of a spiritual discipline so long as we keep in mind our self-denial is not the thing. Our self-denial is not the aim of our faith. Jesus didn't fast for 40 days for the sake of fasting, to show that he could do it. It was about relationship in preparation for mission. At the end of Matthew 3, we see God the Father and God the Spirit confirming the identity of God the Son. And now, as we move into chapter 4, we've moved from Jesus' baptism into his temptation. And the Spirit who descends on him in his baptism now leads him into the wilderness. And his fast is a focal point for his relationship with God the Father. And that explains these really odd temptations that the devil throws at Jesus. You ever notice how odd these temptations are? What does he do? The devil hits Jesus with the first two temptations. I mean, they seem actually pretty harmless, even good. You're hungry? Turn these stones into bread and feed yourself. Or, jump down, and the angels will catch you. The devil even packages these temptations. He packages them in nice, justifying Bible verses. Sounds good. It's curious. And that's the mark of true temptation, isn't it? Real temptation doesn't announce itself as something naughty or bad. No, it masquerades as something harmless or even good. And you see, it's those false promises of temptation that give it its cunning, baffling power. You see what Satan is trying to do here, though. He's trying to drive a wedge in the relationship between Jesus and the Father. You're hungry? Don't trust in the Father's provision. Feed yourself if you are the Son of God. Throw yourself down. Let the angels catch you if you are the Son of God. See, Satan's trying to shake Jesus' trust in the Father. He's trying to shake the divine relationship and sidetrack Jesus on his mission. But Jesus won't be shaken, and he won't be sidetracked. He sees what's going on, and he is not impressed with the devil's Bible proof texting. So for the third temptation, Satan, he puts all the marshmallows on the table now. Here you go, Jesus. All the world. The whole thing. It's all yours. You can do with it whatever you want. Take charge. End all that suffering and evil. Don't let it go on for another minute. I'm ready to hand over the whole thing to you right now if you'll only bow down and worship me. The tempter is giving Jesus a chance to bypass all of the pain and hardship that lies ahead of him. The fickle disciples, the scheming opponents, the long, hard ministry, the betrayal, the denial, the suffering. Jesus can bypass all of that, and he can take charge. He can reign over all the earth. He can claim all the marshmallows, all the rewards right now. He can bypass the cross if he'll only break relationship with the Father. But Jesus is grounded and prepared for everything that the tempter can throw at him, and he sends Satan packing. Worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Jesus' struggle with temptation is not an exercise in willpower. Jesus' struggle with temptation confirms his trusting obedience in the Father's will. Not my will, but your will be done. And it's that trusting obedience that is at the heart of everything that comes after the wilderness temptation. It's what carries Jesus through all the trials and temptations ahead. And there are plenty of more trials and temptations ahead for Jesus. In Matthew 16, we hear Jesus laying out what's coming up in his mission to Jerusalem. He's talking about what's going to happen to him when he gets there. And it's not pretty. But this is where Peter takes him aside and he tries to sidetrack Jesus from his mission. Like the tempter in the wilderness, Peter tries to convince Jesus that he can do his ministry and bypass the cross. Here you go. Jesus turns and he says famously, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have your mind on the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." See, Jesus isn't calling his friend Peter Satan. He's calling Satan out. He recognizes that the tempter is having another run at him here. But again, just as in the wilderness, Jesus is grounded and anchored in his trusting obedience, the things of God, not the things of humans. Not my will, but your will be done. And later in Gethsemane, when death is right in front of him, Jesus again faces the temptation to bypass the cross. But this time, that temptation isn't in the mouth of the tempter, in the mouth of the devil. It's not in the mouth of his friend Peter. It's in his own voice. Matthew 26:39, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." One last time, the tempter is trying desperately to knock Jesus off his mission. And again, that unshakable relationship of trusting obedience that conquers temptation is what grounds Jesus and what steels him for his mission. Yet, not as I will, but as you will. This past week, Keith was sharing a devotion with Wesley Mission's senior managers, and he said that Lent is not so much about what we give up, but about what we take up. And I think that that's absolutely spot on. You know, right after Jesus has this run-in with Peter and the temptation in Matthew 16, he says this. He says, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." You know, people who are stuck in a marshmallow mentality hear the preparatory "deny yourself" and they think that's where it ends. That's the main point. They miss "take up your cross and follow me." It's not just give up. It's not just, do you think Jesus wants his followers who just give up? No, it's give up, take up, and follow. Give up, take up, and follow. Going through Lent, just giving something up is kind of like a footy player who comes to training but then never rocks up at the game, at the match, because he thinks that the training is all there is to it. Or like a muso who plays the intro to the song and then stops there. Jesus doesn't call people to just give up. He calls disciples to take up the cross, to follow where he leads. So what does that mean for you and me as we enter into Lent together? Well, For those of us who have decided to follow Jesus, Lent is a great time to reckon with temptation, to face it, not just to resist it, but to face it and reckon with it. Because we all know temptation, and just as the tempter tried to drive a wedge in the relationship between Jesus and the Father, he's going to try and drive a wedge between you and God. And just as the tempter tried to knock Jesus, sidetrack Jesus from his mission, he's going to try and sidetrack us from our mission. And you're not going to beat the tempter. I'm not going to beat the tempter. You know, he's been doing this for a long time. He's a lot better at it than you are me. He knows this game. He knows how to fool us and trap us. And he is relentless. All right, maybe you can resist the marshmallow in front of you. Oh, by the way, that little guy, he was able to hold out. With white knuckles and gritted teeth, he made it. The tester came back into the room, and she handed that second marshmallow to him, and instantly he stuffed both of them into his mouth. And maybe like him, yeah, you can resist a marshmallow. Maybe because your willpower is strong enough for that. Or maybe you just don't much care for marshmallows. But temptation, real temptation, is relentless. It doesn't quit. If it doesn't get you one way, it'll come at you another way, always trying to drive a wedge in a relationship between you and God and knock you off of God's purpose, sidetrack you from God's mission for your life. And that's why a marshmallow mentality is not enough to reckon with real temptation. As long as it's just you against the temptation will win. Sooner or later, the temptation will beat you. It's so insidious, you might not even recognize that you've been beaten. But so long as it's you against the temptation will beat you. The tempter throws everything at Jesus. He hits Jesus from every angle, and Jesus is victorious. Why? Well, he's Jesus. And Jesus is victorious because he knows that he is not alone. He is led by the Spirit into the wilderness. He is in the will of the Father. It's not just him against temptation. He is not alone. And neither are we. Neither are you, neither am I. We are not alone. Thank God that he doesn't leave us on our own against temptation. That's why it's so important that, like Jesus, we set apart time to deepen our relationship with God in trusting obedience. Not my will, but your will be done. And Lent is a great time to do that. It's a really good time to develop or strengthen spiritual disciplines. You know, the best spiritual disciplines are not something elaborate or fancy or complicated. They're simple and grounded. Like Jesus' fasting. Simple and grounded. But remember, it's not just the give up for Lent. Jesus doesn't call us to give up. He calls us to give up, take up, and follow. He wants us to open up to a deeper relationship with God, to be freed up to live our lives of discipleship. Now let me finish with a practical application. Look at your day. Look at your everyday. What do you do with your time? Is there a half hour in your daily life that you spend on yourself? That you dedicate to yourself? Do you spend a half hour any time in your daily life watching TV or surfing the net or on social media or reading the paper or staring at a device or just having me time. Do you? What if you were to say, Heavenly Father, this is your time, not mine. And I want to dedicate this time to you. What if every day between now and Easter morning, you were to set aside something you normally do for your own pleasure and dedicate that half hour a day to praying for someone else, praying for others, or encouraging others? Simple, straightforward. Say 15 minutes of time in prayer for others, and another 15 minutes of maybe just writing some notes of encouragement. We all know people who need prayer and encouragement, people who would welcome prayers and encouragement, someone who's sick or grieving or someone who's isolated or lonely. Imagine what it would be like to receive that simple card that says, I'm praying for you. I know how much it means to me when I get a card like that. Now, if you can't think of anyone in your circle who you might pray for or encourage, well, we can give you a list. You can start with Glennis Wheatley, the missionary we support in Turkey. If you pray for her every day this week, you spend 15 minutes praying for her, you spend 15 minutes writing a note of encouragement, we'll gather those up next week. We'll send them along. Or the frontline staff of Wesley Mission, so many of them who are out there at the coal face doing hard jobs, seeing real brokenness and pain and trying to bring the love, hope, and compassion of Jesus Christ every day. Many of them unseen. You know how much it would mean to them to know that we are praying for them? For them to get a card that says, I prayed for you today, and I see your work as sacred work. I thank God for you. There's so much we can do, and it's simple. It's not rocket science. It's grounded. And remember, we're not left on our own. God walks this journey with us, and by His grace, our relationship with Him will not be shaken. By His grace, we will not be sidetracked from our God-given mission. Through Christ, with Christ, and in Christ, we will overcome.